Okay, let's dive into a world of color. Um, and traditions, Day of the Dead, Dia de Muertos.
Yeah, a fascinating tradition.
We've got some great research here. Excited to unpack it all.
It really challenges, assumptions about death, how it's viewed, celebrated, all of that.
Yeah. Like, the first time I heard about Day of the Dead, I definitely pictured something spooky, like Halloween almost.
Not quite.
Not really the vibe, huh?
Halloween is scary, yeah. Day of the Dead is about celebrating lives of people who've passed.
Okay.
It's a time to remember, share stories, and welcome their spirits back.
So it's not about, like, fearing death. It's about embracing the memory of loved ones.
Exactly.
That's really interesting.
And what's so interesting is that it blends, Aztec beliefs with Catholic traditions, from the Spanish, of course.
Right, the sources mention that, like indigenous roots with a Spanish twist.
And that's what makes it so unique.
So how does that actually, like, play out in the celebrations? What do people actually do?
Ofrendas, or altars, I guess you could say.
Okay, altars.
They're decorated with 𝗧𝗔𝗧𝗔𝗓,
𝗧𝗔𝗓𝗔𝗓.
those bright orange marigolds.
Oh, okay, marigolds, got it.
You see them everywhere during Day of the Dead.
Why are they so important? The marigolds? I mean...
They guide the spirits back home with their color and their scent. And you'll also find photos of the deceased on the ofrendas.
Okay.
Favorite foods, drinks, other personal items.
So it's like a personalized welcome back party for the spirits.
Exactly.
I love that.
Each ofrenda is totally unique, a tribute to whoever passed.
Makes sense.
Oh, and speaking of unique, we got to talk about sugar skulls.
Right. Those are everywhere during Day of the Dead. They always seemed a little spooky, honestly, at first glance. But the sources mention that they're not morbid.
Not at all.
So what are they really about?
They're a symbol of life and remembrance,
Mm.
kind of disguised as, something we associate with death.
That's interesting.
They come in all sizes,
Yeah.
decorated with bright colors and playful designs.
Like taking something scary and making it beautiful.
That's Day of the Dead in a nutshell, turning fear into joy.
I love that.
Speaking of joy, we can't forget the food.
Right. The sources mentioned pan de muerto or bread of the dead. What is that exactly?
Sweet bread, often shaped like bones or skulls,
Yeah.
and decorated with sugary tears, I guess you could say.
Wow.
But it's not just delicious, it's symbolic, an offering to nourish the spirits on their journey back.
So even the food has a deeper meaning. That's amazing. Like, so much symbolism is woven into every aspect of Day of the Dead.
Absolutely. And you'll also see tamales often on the ofrendas. They're associated with family gatherings.
So it's about connecting with loved ones, even through food.
Exactly. Shared memories.
I love that. It's so beautiful how even something as simple as meal can become a way to remember and honor people who are gone.
It is.
One of the sources mentioned a young musician, Mateo, I think.
Yes, Mateo.
He honors his grandmother by playing the song she taught him.
Such a good example of how music can be like a bridge between the living and the dead.
Right. Music can definitely bring back those strong memories.
Yeah.
So we've got these altars, right? And sugar skulls. And the food. But it sounds like there's also a deeper side to it, a spiritual side to Day of the Dead.
Definitely.
So what does that look like?
Well, a lot of people believe that the veil between the living and the dead is very thin during Day of the Dead.
Okay.
So it allows for a connection, a special connection.
It's almost like a family reunion where everyone is invited,
That's a great way to put it.
living and past.
And at the center of it all is memory.
Yeah, the sources really emphasize that. That Day of the Dead is about keeping those memories alive and passing them down
It is.
to future generations.
It's about storytelling, sharing stories, making sure those who are gone aren't forgotten.
And is this just in Mexico? Or is this something that's spreading more widely?
You're right. It's not just in Mexico anymore. It's gaining popularity all over the world.
I've noticed that too. Like, I'm seeing Day of the Dead stuff even here, outside of Mexico. Why do you think that is?
Well, globalization, cultural exchange, the internet, social media. It's all exposing people to different cultures, traditions.
So the world is becoming smaller in a way, and people are just, like, more curious about other cultures?
Exactly. And Day of the Dead, with all the colors, music, it's really captivating.
It's a celebration that seems to resonate with a lot of people.
It really does. And I think it's tapping into this growing interest in, like, different ways to think about death.
Right, like alternatives to the traditional funerals and things.
Yeah, exactly. People are looking for something different.
And Day of the Dead is like all about celebration, right? Not just mourning.
Exactly. It's about keeping the memory alive in a
Right.
joyful way, in a meaningful way.
Okay, so we've talked about the altars and the food and the vibe of Day of the Dead. But can we go back to the symbolism for a second? Specifically on the altars.
Absolutely.
What's going on there?
They're like little miniature worlds, carefully crafted to welcome the spirits home. And each item has a special meaning.
Right, right. So the marigolds guide the spirits. But what about some of the other stuff?
Well, for instance, water.
Oh, wow.
To quench their thirst after the long journey.
Makes sense. I also read about candles being important.
Yes. Candles. Crucial. They represent light and hope, and they illuminate the path for the spirits.
Oh, that's cool. And then, of course, there are photos and belongings, which are like super personal to each person.
They're reminders of that person's life and personality, like favorite books, hobbies, things like that, to tell their story.
And the food. We can't forget about the food. It seems like a place that could big role in all of this.
It does. Each dish, is chosen carefully.
Okay.
Each one has a special meaning.
So, like, what kind of meanings are we talking about?
Well, pan de muerto, for example.
Yeah.
The bread represents the cycle of life and death, with the bone shapes and all.
I read that mole is sometimes offered because it represents, like, the complexity of life.
That's right.
Okay.
And tamales, they're usually associated with family gatherings and togetherness.
Oh, right.
So there's a lot of thought put into these ofrendas.
Yeah, a lot of care, a lot of love. It really shows, the depth of this whole tradition.
It's a beautiful expression of love and remembrance.
It is. Okay, so we've talked about the ofrendas and the food, but what about the music? What kind of music is played during Day of the Dead?
It's lively.
Yeah.
Music plays a vital role in Day of the Dead. It's not just background noise. It's an active part of the celebration. Music is meant to uplift the spirits and create that joyful atmosphere.
It's like welcoming them back.
Exactly.
And like we saw with Mateo's story, it can be really personal.
Right.
Connecting through music.
Hearing a song that someone loved can bring back those memories.
Yeah. So, like, what kind of music are we talking about here?
Well, traditional Mexican music, for sure, like mariachi bands. And there's often singing and dancing.
That sounds fun.
It is. But it's not all, upbeat and celebratory.
Oh.
Some of the music can be more melancholic, more reflective.
That makes sense.
Acknowledging the sadness, while also honoring the life that was lived.
Right. So it's about embracing all the emotions, the full spectrum of emotions that come with loss and remembrance.
Yes.
It is. That's interesting. I like that. So music sets the mood, but Day of the Dead is also a visual experience.
Yeah.
Like, there are so many colors and images, right?
Day of the Dead is all about visual storytelling. And the use of color is very symbolic, very intentional.
So break it down for me. Like, what are some of the key colors? And what do they represent?
Okay, well, orange.
The marigolds.
Exactly. Orange is everywhere, thanks to the 𝗧𝗔𝗪𝗪.
Right.
So orange is associated with the sun, and in this context, it represents the warmth of the loved one's spirits. It's believed to guide the spirits back.
Oh, wow. Like a visual welcome home sign?
Yeah, exactly. And then you have purple, often associated with royalty, spirituality.
Okay.
And in Day of the Dead, it can represent mourning and remembrance.
So a bit more somber.
Right.
What about white? I see a lot of white, too.
White symbolizes purity and hope. It's often used in decorations and clothing, representing the belief in the afterlife, the continuation of the spirit.
Got it. What about pink? Like the bright pink and fuchsia colors, I see those too.
Celebration and joy.
Makes sense.
A reminder to celebrate the life that was lived, even in the face of loss.
It's like the colors themselves are telling a story.
They are. Day of the Dead embraces all of those emotions, and color is the way to express them.
And then you have the sugar skulls, right? Which are decorated with tons of colors.
They are.
What do you think is the significance of that?
Yeah.
Using such bright colors on, skulls.
It's powerful. Day of the Dead is all about transforming things.
Okay.
Taking something that's usually seen as scary, somber, and turning it into something vibrant and celebratory.
Like reclaiming it, almost.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the colors, but are there any other images or symbols that really stand out to you when you think of Day of the Dead?
Well, skeletons and skulls. But they're not scary. They're usually dressed up, dancing, playing music.
So more playful, not like, the Grim Reaper kind of thing.
Not at all.
Go ahead.
It's a reminder that death is natural. It's just part of life.
Yeah.
Part of the cycle.
A very different perspective.
Very different.
From how death is, like, portrayed in Western cultures.
It is. And it's refreshing.
What else? What other imagery comes to mind?
Butterflies.
Oh, yeah, I've seen those. Especially monarchs.
Right. They're believed to represent the souls of the departed, returning to visit.
Interesting. Why monarchs?
They migrate to Mexico around the time of Day of the Dead. So that strengthens the connection, I think.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Like, nature itself is part of the celebration.
Exactly.
This is also fascinating.
It is.
And we haven't even, like, scratched the surface of the cultural significance of all of this.
We haven't.
Like, it's a tradition with such deep roots, right?
Well, absolutely. Day of the Dead is deeply rooted in Mexican history.
Okay.
You can trace it back thousands of years to, the Aztecs and other indigenous cultures.
Okay.
They had a strong belief in the afterlife. And they honored their ancestors with rituals and offerings.
It's a tradition that's been passed down for generations.
It has, evolving along the way.
Right. So how did the Spanish influence all of this?
Well, when they arrived, they brought their own Catholic traditions.
Okay.
And those two belief systems, they blended, creating this the unique celebration we see today.
So pre-Hispanic beliefs mixed with Catholic traditions.
Exactly. Pre-Hispanic reverence for ancestors combined with, All Saints' Day, All Souls' Day.
Wow, it's like a tapestry woven from all these different threads, creating something totally new.
It is. And over time, Day of the Dead has become so deeply embedded in Mexican culture.
Yeah. So what role does it play in Mexican society today?
It's a time for families to come together, remember their loved ones, strengthen their bonds, celebrate life, remember that death isn't the end.
It sounds very unifying.
It is. And it's not just celebrated in homes, there are public altars, parades, festivals.
That's really a shared experience then.
It is.
It's amazing how a tradition that's so personal can also be so communal.
It really is. That's the beauty of Day of the Dead.
Okay, so we've talked about the history and the cultural context.
Right.
But how has Day of the Dead been portrayed in, like, movies and TV shows? It seems like it's popping up everywhere these days.
It has. Day of the Dead has definitely made its way into popular culture, especially in recent years.
I've seen it in everything from, like, Pixar movies to James Bond films. Do you think these portrayals are doing a good job of representing the true meaning of the celebration? Or is it more surface-level stuff?
It's a mixed bag, honestly. Some representations have been praised for authenticity, respect for the tradition. But others have been criticized.
Right. So there's a fine line between cultural appreciation and appropriation.
Definitely.
What are some examples of portrayals you've seen? Both good and bad, I guess.
Well, Coco is a good example.
Yeah.
The Pixar movie.
That is a great movie.
It was. It really captured the spirit of Day of the Dead, I think. It was visually stunning and very respectful of the traditions and beliefs.
It did a really good job of introducing Day of the Dead to a wider audience.
It did. It was very authentic. And then there are examples that, well, aren't so good.
What comes to mind?
I remember that James Bond movie, Spectre. It had a whole scene with the Day of the Dead parade.
Oh, yeah. In Mexico City?
Right. That scene caused some debate.
Oh, really? Why is that?
While visually impressive, some people argued that it was too commercialized and it didn't accurately reflect the true meaning of Day of the Dead,
So it's a reminder that we need to be careful, mindful about how we're portraying different cultures.
We do, especially as Day of the Dead becomes more well-known globally.
Yeah.
It's important to make sure that the tradition is honored, not exploited.
Well said.
Culture is not a costume.
Okay, so we've talked about Day of the Dead's portrayal in, pop culture.
Yeah.
But what about its global impact? Like, it's not just a Mexican tradition anymore, right?
It's not.
I've seen it more and more. What do you think is driving this global interest?
Well, globalization, for one, and cultural exchange. The internet has played a huge role. Social media, they expose people to different cultures and traditions, like more than ever before.
Yeah, like we were saying before, the world is becoming smaller. People are just, like, more curious about other cultures.
Exactly. And Day of the Dead is really interesting, all the bright colors, the music, and that unique perspective on death.
Right.
It's really captivated people worldwide.
Yeah, it definitely has.
And I think there's also just a growing interest in different ways of commemorating death,
Okay.
honoring loved ones.
Right. So like moving away from the traditional funerals and things.
Yeah, people are like looking for something beyond that. And Day of the Dead, with all the celebration and remembrance, offers something different.
It does. So how is it being adapted and reinterpreted in different parts of the world? Like, are people just copying Mexican traditions, or are they putting their own spin on things?
I think it's a mix of both, to be honest. You see people embracing the traditional Mexican customs, but there's also like a blending happening, a sort of adaptation.
So it's not just a one-size-fits-all celebration.
Right. You see Day of the Dead blended with other cultural traditions sometimes.
So like a fusion
Yeah.
of different ways of, honoring and remembering.
Exactly. So you might see Day of the Dead incorporated into Halloween celebrations, for example,
Mm-hmm.
or other kinds of festivals.
Wow. It's pretty amazing that an ancient tradition can be so adaptable.
It is. It really highlights that, human desire, that
Ah.
desire to remember and honor loved ones, no matter the culture.
That's a beautiful point.
It is.
But this global popularity also raises some, concerns, like commercialization and the risk of exploiting the tradition.
Right. Yes, it's a double-edged sword, that's for sure.
In what way?
Well, on the one hand, this increased popularity has brought more awareness to the celebration, and it's introduced it to a wider audience.
Which is great, right? Sharing this tradition with the world.
It can be, but there's also the risk of it becoming superficial,
Okay.
losing its meaning.
Right. We see that happen a lot with different cultural traditions, sadly.
We do. And with Day of the Dead, it's important to make sure that it's not just about costumes and, decorations.
Right. It's about honoring the deeper meaning of remembering, honoring those loved ones.
You got it. And I think education is a key part of that. The more people understand the history, the traditions, the meaning of Day of the Dead, the more likely they are to, approach it with respect.
So it's about going beyond the surface then, really understanding the cultural roots of the celebration.
Exactly.
I've definitely seen like Day of the Dead imagery used to just sell products, and that just feels wrong. Like
Yeah.
it feels disrespectful
It is.
because those products have nothing to do with, the actual celebration.
I agree. And when the focus becomes just about costumes and parties, that misses the point,
Right. It's about remembering, not just partying.
It is. And so I think when in doubt, it's always best to, err on the side of caution.
Right. So education and respect. Those are really important here.
Absolutely.
Okay, I want to shift gears a bit and go back to the spiritual side of Day of the Dead, which we talked about a little earlier.
Sure.
It's so interesting. It's a really fascinating aspect of this whole thing.
It really is. It's a very profound element of the tradition.
A lot of sources talk about the belief that, the veil between the living and the dead is thinnest during this time. What does that actually mean, though? Can you explain that?
Yeah. So it's the belief that the spirits of those who've passed can more easily, cross over during Day of the Dead.
So it's not just about remembering them. It's about feeling their presence. Almost.
Okay. And that connection, it can manifest in different ways,
Yeah.
Some people might feel a sense of their loved one's presence. Others might receive messages or signs.
Wow, that's interesting. So it's a very personal experience then.
It is.
Sounds like it could be very comforting, too.
It can be.
Yeah.
It's often accompanied by a sense of peace and comfort, even joy.
Yeah. Like a reminder that, even though they're gone physically, their spirits are still with us.
Exactly. And Day of the Dead gives us this opportunity, to connect with those spirits and honor their memory.
So it's a celebration that bridges the gap between the physical and spiritual, the worlds.
Yes. And it offers a very different perspective on death, I think. Less about, finality and more about continuity and connection.
It's a beautiful way to think about death.
I agree.
It is.
It reminds us that even though our bodies, might perish, our spirits live on.
And that love, it kind of transcends those boundaries of life and death. Right?
Beautifully said.
We've talked about all these traditions and beliefs, right? But on a more personal level, how does Day of the Dead make you feel?
That's a great question.
What emotions come up when you think about this celebration?
For me, it's warmth, nostalgia, connection to my heritage.
That's nice.
It is. I think about all the stories my grandparents used to tell me about their loved ones. And it brings a sense of gratitude for their legacy, you know.
Yeah, those stories are so powerful.
They are.
It's a way to keep those memories alive.
And it gives me a sense of hope and comfort, knowing that even though our bodies are temporary, our spirits live on.
Right. It's a nice reminder.
It is.
That we're all part of something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And that love and connection, they go beyond those boundaries of life and death. I think that's something that a lot of people can connect with, no matter the culture.
It's a universal human experience, you know. Love, loss, and the desire for connection.
It really is. And Day of the Dead gives us a framework for honoring those experiences, you know, and celebrating life, even in the face of death.
Okay, before we move on to our final thoughts, I want to touch on something else. The role of art, creativity, in Day of the Dead.
Day of the Dead is truly a feast for the senses.
It is.
And art plays a central role.
Yes, it does. From those intricate sugar skulls to the vibrant ofrendas, everything's so artistic.
It is. And it goes beyond, you know, the traditional art forms, too.
Okay.
Music, dance, poetry, even fashion.
So what are some of the most striking examples you've seen of art in Day of the Dead?
Well, the sugar skulls are incredible, you know?
Oh, yeah, they are.
The detail, the craftsmanship, though they're decorated.
They're like miniature works of art.
They are.
Okay, what else?
The ofrendas are amazing.
They're beautiful.
They're like these elaborate installations, you know?
Yeah, and each one is so unique. Like, they really reflect the person.
They do.
The personality, the passions.
You might see ofrendas for musicians, artists, writers, just everyday people, you know, whose lives were full of creativity.
It's a way to tell her story through art.
Beautifully said. And then you have the sand paintings, you know?
Yeah.
The sawdust carpets, they're amazing.
Oh, yeah. I've seen pictures. So detailed.
Well, and they don't last long, you know?
Right. They're temporary.
It's a reminder that life is fleeting, that we should, you know, cherish every moment.
But even though they're temporary, they leave a lasting impression. The memories, the emotions.
They do.
Powerful.
That's the power of art.
So it's not just decoration. Art is really essential to Day of the Dead.
It is. It's a way to express, you know, to celebrate, to connect, and to find beauty and meaning.
So we've covered the art, but what about humor? Does humor play a role in Day of the Dead? I know that might seem counterintuitive to some people.
It might, but it does.
It does.
It does. Day of the Dead is about embracing the full spectrum of human emotions.
Okay.
It's not about ignoring the sadness, you know?
Yeah.
But about finding joy and light, even in the face of death.
So it's not like disrespectful to laugh and joke?
No, not at all. It's actually encouraged. Many believe that the, you know, the spirits of the departed would want their loved ones to be happy, to celebrate.
I like that.
You know? It's like saying, don't mourn for me. Celebrate me.
That's a great way to put it. So it's about, you know, remembering with a smile.
Exactly. And humor is a great way to do that.
How so?
Well, you see it in the decorations, the costumes, and even the calaveras literarias. Have you heard of those?
I haven't. What are those?
They're poems. Short, humorous poems. Often about living people.
Okay.
Kind of like playful obituaries.
Oh, wow.
Poking fun at people's flaws and habits. But in a light-hearted way.
That's interesting.
It's a way of acknowledging that we're all human, you know?
Right.
We all have our quirks.
It's good to remember that sometimes.
It is.
Not to take ourselves too seriously.
Exactly. And to find the joy in the absurdity, you know, of life and death.
I like that. So humor really is an important part of all of this then.
It is.
It adds a layer of like playfulness.
Lightness.
Yeah, lightness. It reminds us that even though we're...
It does remind us, even when we're talking about loss, that life is to be celebrated.
Exactly. So we've talked about the art, the music, the humor, all these different elements that make Day of the Dead so unique. But family traditions seem to play a pretty big role too. Do you have any insights into how families personalize their Day of the Dead celebrations?
Absolutely. Family is at the heart of Day of the Dead. Each family often has its own traditions, customs passed down through generations.
Like what? What kind of traditions?
It could be anything. The foods they prepare for the ofrenda, for example, or the way they decorate their altars.
Okay.
Some families might have special songs they sing or stories they share. Others might have a particular place they like to visit on Day of the Dead.
So it's about adding those personal touches.
Yeah.
You know, making the celebration meaningful for their family.
Exactly. And those traditions become a way for families to connect with their heritage, to keep those memories alive.
It's like a thread connecting the past, present, and future.
You got it. And those traditions change over time, too. As families grow, they might adapt, incorporate new elements, but they still honor those core values of remembrance and celebration.
It's a blend of tradition and innovation, honoring the past but embracing the present.
It really is.
And speaking of innovation, it's really fascinating to see how this ancient tradition is adapting to the contemporary world. We've talked about how Day of the Dead is becoming more popular outside of Mexico.
Yes. It's not just confined to a specific place or culture anymore. It's becoming a global phenomenon.
And as it spreads, it evolves,
Mm-hmm.
takes on new forms. What are some examples of how Day of the Dead is being reinterpreted?
Well, in some places it's being blended with other cultural traditions. It's like a fusion, different ways of remembering, honoring loved ones.
So you might see Day of the Dead elements incorporated into celebrations
Yeah.
that aren't traditionally Mexican.
Exactly. You might see Day of the Dead elements in Halloween celebrations, for example, or other cultural festivals.
Interesting.
It's really fascinating to see how different cultures are finding resonance with those themes, of remembrance and celebration, the themes that are so central to Day of the Dead.
It really speaks to that universal human experience of loss and that desire to connect with those who have passed.
It really does. And it's so exciting to see how these cultural exchanges are shaping the evolution of this tradition.
Right. It's exciting, but it also comes with some challenges, right?
Yeah.
Like we have to be mindful of things like commercialization and the potential for exploiting the tradition.
That's a very important point.
Yeah, it's a conversation we need to be having.
Absolutely. It's a complex issue. On one hand, this increased popularity of Day of the Dead, it has brought a lot more awareness to the celebration
Yeah,
and introduced it to more people.
which is good, right?
Yeah.
Sharing this beautiful tradition.
It can be, but there's always the risk that it becomes too superficial, that it loses its true meaning.
Yeah, we see this happen a lot, unfortunately.
We do. And with Day of the Dead, it's really important to make sure that it doesn't just become about selling costumes and decorations.
Right. It's about honoring the deeper significance of remembering and honoring those loved ones.
You got it. And I think a big part of navigating this is education. The more people understand the history, the traditions, the meaning of Day of the Dead, the more likely they are to approach it with respect, with sensitivity.
So it's about going beyond the surface then, really understanding the cultural roots.
Precisely.
And I think being mindful of our intentions.
Yeah.
Like, are we genuinely trying to honor the tradition, or are we just using it for our own personal gain?
That's a good question to ask.
It is. It's something we should all ask ourselves when engaging with any cultural tradition, I think. Like, are we actually contributing to this in a positive way, or are we exploiting it?
Exactly. And I think when in doubt, it's always best to just err on the side of caution. Be respectful.
So education, intention, and respect. Those are really important
They are.
if you're going to engage with this tradition.
Absolutely.
Okay. I want to shift gears a little bit. Go back to the spiritual side of Day of the Dead, which we talked about earlier.
Oh, yeah.
It's a fascinating element of this celebration.
It's really profound.
Many of the sources we looked at talk about this belief that the veil between the living and the dead is at its thinnest during this time. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's this belief that during Day of the Dead, the spirits of our loved ones can more easily cross over and visit us.
So it's not just about remembering them symbolically, but actually feeling their presence.
Exactly.
That's interesting.
And that connection, it can manifest in different ways for different people. Some might feel a sense of their loved one's presence. Others might receive messages or signs,
Wow, that's really interesting. So it's a very personal and intimate experience.
It is. And often it's accompanied by a sense of peace and comfort, even joy.
Yeah, like a reminder that even though they're gone physically, their spirits are still with us in a way.
Exactly. And Day of the Dead provides this special opportunity to connect with those spirits and honor their memory.
It's a beautiful way to think about death, don't you think?
I do. It's a reminder that even though our physical bodies, perish, our spirits, they live on.
And that love kind of transcends those boundaries of life and death.
Beautifully said.
We've talked a lot about the traditions and the beliefs and everything, but on a personal level, how does Day of the Dead make you feel?
That's a great question.
What emotions come up for you when you think about this celebration?
For me, it evokes a sense of warmth, nostalgia, a deep connection to, my heritage. I think about all the stories my grandparents would tell me about their loved ones who had passed on, and it makes me feel a sense of gratitude for the legacy they left behind.
It sounds like a really heartwarming experience.
It is. It's about keeping those memories alive and passing them down, to future generations. And I also feel a sense of hope and comfort, knowing that even though our physical bodies may perish, our spirits live on.
It's a nice reminder that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And that love and connection, they go beyond those boundaries of life and death. It's a sentiment that I think a lot of people can connect with, no matter what culture they come from.
It's true. Because ultimately, we all share those same basic human experiences, right? Love, loss, the desire for connection.
Exactly. And Day of the Dead, it gives us a framework, for honoring those experiences, celebrating life in all its fullness, even in the face of death.
It's a beautiful thing. Okay, I want to touch on one more thing before we move on to our final thoughts. The role of art and creativity in Day of the Dead.
Oh, yeah. Day of the Dead is such a feast for the senses.
It is.
And art plays such a central role.
Yes, from the sugar skulls to the ofrendas, everything is so artistic.
It is. And it goes beyond the traditional art forms, too.
Okay.
Music, dance, poetry, fashion, even food. It's like this collective outpouring of artistic energy, all inspired by the themes of remembrance and celebration, the things that are at the heart of Day of the Dead.
What are some of those striking examples of art you've seen associated with Day of the Dead?
The sugar skulls are always incredible to me. The level of detail, the craftsmanship, and the way they're decorated with all those vibrant colors and patterns, it's breathtaking.
They're like tiny, edible works of art.
They really are. And then you have the ofrendas, which are like these altars transformed into elaborate artistic installations.
I love how each ofrenda is so unique.
Yeah.
And really reflects the person being honored, their personality, their passions.
Exactly. You might see ofrendas dedicated to musicians or artists, writers, or even just everyday people, whose lives were full of creativity and passion.
It's like art becomes this way to tell their story and keep their spirit alive.
Beautifully said. And then you have those more ephemeral art forms, like the sand paintings and sawdust carpets they create for Day of the Dead. Have you seen those?
I've seen pictures of them. They're so intricate and detailed.
They are. And what's so fascinating to me is that they're only meant to last a short time, It's a reminder of the fleeting nature of life.
Yeah.
And that we should cherish every moment.
And yet, even though those artworks are temporary, the memories they evoke, the emotions they stir up, those are lasting.
Exactly. That's the power of art, isn't it? It transcends time and space and connects us to something deeper.
So art isn't just a decorative element of Day of the Dead. It's really an integral part of the whole celebration.
Absolutely. It's a way to express grief, to celebrate life, to connect with our ancestors, and to find beauty and meaning even in the face of death.
As we're talking about all this art and all the symbolism, it makes me wonder, is there a place for humor in Day of the Dead? I know that might seem counterintuitive to some people.
It might, but there is.
There is.
Day of the Dead is about embracing all of those human emotions, the full spectrum. It's not about denying the sadness of loss, but about finding the joy and the light that exist even in the face of death.
So it's not disrespectful to laugh and joke during Day of the Dead?
Not at all. It's actually encouraged. Many believe that the spirits of the departed would want their loved ones to be happy, to celebrate. It's like saying, don't mourn for me, celebrate me.
I love that. It's about finding that joy and remembering loved ones with a smile.
Exactly. And humor is a great way to do that. You see it in the decorations, the costumes, even in these poems. They're called calaveras literarias. Have you heard of them?
I haven't. What are those?
They're short, humorous poems, often written about living people, kind of like playful, rhyming obituaries.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, often poking fun at people's flaws or habits, but always in a lighthearted, affectionate way.
That sounds hilarious. I can see how that would add a really unique element to the celebration.
It does. It's a way of acknowledging that we're all human. We all have our quirks. And even in death, we can still laugh at ourselves and at each other.
It's a good reminder to not take ourselves too seriously.
Exactly. And to find the joy in the absurdity of life and death.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about art and music and humor, all these amazing elements that make Day of the Dead so unique and vibrant. But family traditions seem to play a big role as well. How do families personalize their Day of the Dead celebrations?
Family is really at the heart of Day of the Dead. And each family often has its own unique traditions, customs, things that are passed down through generations.
What are some examples of those traditions? What kind of things do people do to make the celebration special for their families?
It could be anything, really. From the specific foods they prepare for the ofrenda to the way they decorate their altars. Some families might have special songs they sing or stories they share, while others might have a particular place they visit on Day of the Dead.
It's about adding those personal touches then,
Yeah,
making it meaningful.
exactly. And those traditions become a way for families to, connect with their heritage, to keep the memories alive.
It's like a thread that connects the past, present, and future.
Exactly. And it's beautiful to see how those traditions often evolve over time. As families grow and change, they might adapt and incorporate new elements while still honoring those core values of remembrance and celebration.
It's a blend, tradition and innovation, honoring the past, embracing the present.
It really is.
We've talked about how Day of the Dead is becoming, more popular around the world. It's fascinating to see how this ancient tradition is adapting to contemporary times.
It really is. It's no longer confined to a specific location, cultural group. Day of the Dead is truly becoming a global phenomenon.
And as it spreads, it's evolving, taking on new forms. I'm curious, how is Day of the Dead being reinterpreted in different parts of the world?
Well, in some places, it's being blended with other cultural traditions. It's like a fusion of, different ways of honoring and remembering loved ones.
So you might see elements of Day of the Dead incorporated into celebrations that aren't traditionally Mexican.
Exactly. Like you might see Day of the Dead elements incorporated into Halloween celebrations, for example, or other cultural festivals.
It's really interesting.
It is. It's fascinating to see how different cultures are finding resonance with those themes of remembrance and celebration that are at the heart of Day of the Dead.
It really speaks to that universal human experience of loss, the desire to connect to those who have passed on.
It really does. And it's exciting to see how these cultural exchanges are shaping the evolution of this ancient tradition.
Of course, as Day of the Dead becomes more popular around the world, we have to talk about the commercialization, the potential for exploiting the tradition. It's a conversation we need to be having.
Absolutely. It's a complex issue. On one hand, the increased popularity has brought more awareness to the celebration and introduced it to a wider audience.
Which is a good thing, right? Sharing this beautiful tradition with the world.
It can be. But there's also the risk of it becoming too superficial, losing its true meaning. And we've seen this happen with a lot of cultural traditions, sadly.
I've definitely seen instances where Day of the Dead imagery is used to sell products that have nothing to do with the celebration. And honestly, it feels wrong. It feels disrespectful.
I agree. Or when the focus shifts to the costumes and parties, rather than the deeper meaning of remembering and honoring loved ones. It's like walking a tightrope between cultural appreciation and cultural exploitation.
So how do we navigate that? How do we appreciate and celebrate Day of the Dead without diluting its meaning?
I think a big part of it is education. The more people understand, the more they know about the history and the traditions, the true meaning of Day of the Dead, the more likely they are to approach it with respect and sensitivity.
It's about moving beyond the surface, right? And really understanding the cultural roots.
Exactly. And it's also about being mindful of our own intentions. Are we genuinely trying to honor the tradition? Or are we just using it for personal gain?
That's a good question.
It is.
It's something we should all ask ourselves.
Yeah.
When we're engaging with, a cultural tradition that's not our own, are we contributing to it? Or are we exploiting it?
Exactly. And when in doubt, it's always best to err on the side of caution and respect.
So education, intention, and respect. Those are the guiding principles for engaging with Day of the Dead in a way that honors its true spirit.
Absolutely. And it's an ongoing conversation. As Day of the Dead continues to grow and evolve, we need to keep talking about this, make sure the tradition is preserved and honored for future generations.
I agree. Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit and go back to the spiritual aspect of Day of the Dead, which we touched on earlier.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a fascinating dimension of this celebration.
It truly is. It's really profound.
A lot of the sources we looked at talked about this belief that the veil between the living and the dead is at its thinnest during this time. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. It's the belief that during Day of the Dead, the spirits of those we love, they can more easily cross over and visit.
So it's not just remembering them symbolically,
Yeah.
but actually feeling their presence.
Exactly.
That's powerful.
And that connection it can manifest in different ways, for different people. Some might feel a sense of their loved one's presence. Others might receive messages, signs.
It sounds like a very personal and intimate experience.
It is. And often it's accompanied by a sense of peace, comfort, and even joy.
It's like a reminder that even though our loved ones are physically gone, their spirits are still with us in some way.
Exactly. And Day of the Dead provides a special opportunity to connect with those spirits, honor their memory.
So it's a celebration that bridges the gap between the physical and the spiritual.
It is. And it offers a very different perspective on death and the afterlife. Less about finality and separation and more about continuity and connection.
It's a beautiful way to think about death, isn't it?
It is. It's a reminder that even though our physical bodies may perish, our spirits, they live on.
And that love transcends those boundaries of life and death.
Beautifully said.
We've talked a lot about the traditions, the beliefs surrounding Day of the Dead. But I'm curious, on a personal level, how does Day of the Dead make you feel? What emotions come up for you when you think about this celebration?
That's a great question. For me, it evokes a sense of warmth, nostalgia, and this really deep connection to, my heritage. I think about all the stories my grandparents used to tell me about their loved ones. And it just makes me feel a sense of gratitude for the legacy that, they left behind.
It sounds like a very heartwarming experience.
It is. It's about keeping those memories alive and passing them down through the generations. And I also feel, a sense of hope and comfort, knowing that even though our bodies are temporary, our spirits live on.
It's a good reminder.
It is.
That we're all part of something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. And that love and connection, they transcend the boundaries of life and death. It's a sentiment that I think so many people around the world share, regardless of their background.
It's true. Because ultimately, we all share those same basic human experiences, right? Love, loss, that desire for connection.
Exactly. And Day of the Dead just gives us this beautiful framework for honoring those experiences and for celebrating life in all of its fullness, even in the face of death.
It's really a remarkable celebration. Okay, before we move on to our final thoughts, I want to touch on one more thing. The role of art and creativity in Day of the Dead.
Yes. Day of the Dead is truly a feast for the senses.
It is.
Yet art plays such an integral role.
It really does. From those intricate sugar skulls to those vibrant ofrendas, everything is infused with so much artistic expression. And it's not just limited to traditional art forms either.
Right. You see that creative spirit expressed in music, in dance, in poetry, in fashion, even in the food. It's like this collective outpouring of creative energy, all inspired by those themes of remembrance and celebration, which are, of course, at the heart of Day of the Dead.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
What are some of the most striking examples of art that you've seen associated with Day of the Dead?
Well, the sugar skulls always amaze me. The level of detail, the craftsmanship, and the way they're decorated with those vibrant colors and intricate patterns, it's just breathtaking.
They're like these tiny edible works of art.
They really are. And then, you have the ofrendas, which are almost like these altars transformed into elaborate artistic installations.
I love how each ofrenda is so unique. It really reflects the person that's being honored, their personality, their passions.
Exactly. You might see ofrendas dedicated to musicians or artists or writers, even just everyday people whose lives were full of creativity and passion.
It's like art becomes this way to tell their story, to keep their spirit alive.
Beautifully said. And then you have those more ephemeral art forms, like the sand paintings and the sawdust carpets that are created for Day of the Dead. Have you ever seen pictures of those?
I've seen pictures of those. They're so intricate and detailed.
They are. And what's so fascinating is that they're really only meant to last for a short time. It's a reminder of the, fleeting nature of life, the importance of cherishing every moment.
And yet, even though those artworks are temporary, the memories they evoke and the emotions they stir, those are lasting.
Exactly. And that's the power of art, right? It transcends time and space, and it connects us to something, deeper than ourselves.
So art isn't just a decorative element of Day of the Dead. It's really integral to the celebration.
Absolutely. It's a way to express grief, to celebrate life, to connect with our ancestors, and to find beauty and meaning, even in the face of death.
As we're talking about all this art and the symbolism, it makes me wonder, is there a place for humor in Day of the Dead? Because I know that might seem a little counterintuitive to some people.
It might, but there is.
There is.
Day of the Dead is about embracing the full spectrum of human emotions. It's not about denying the sadness of loss. It's about finding that joy and that light that exist even in the face of death.
So it's not disrespectful to laugh and joke during Day of the Dead?
Not at all. It's actually encouraged. Many believe that the spirits of the departed would want their loved ones to be happy, to celebrate. It's like saying, don't mourn for me, celebrate me.
That's a great way to put it. So it's about remembering with a smile.
Exactly. And humor is a great way to do that. You see it reflected in the decorations, the costumes, even in a form of poetry called calaveras literarias. Have you heard of those?
Calaveras literarias? I haven't. What are those?
They're like these short, humorous poems, often written about living people, kind of like playful, rhyming obituaries.
Oh, interesting.
They're often poking fun at people's flaws and habits, but always in a lighthearted, affectionate way.
That sounds hilarious. I can see how that would add a really unique element to the celebration.
They do. It's a way of acknowledging that, we're all human, we all have our quirks. And even in death, we can still laugh at ourselves and at each other.
It's a good reminder not to take ourselves too seriously.
Exactly. And to find the joy in the absurdity of life and death.
I love that. So humor is not just a coping mechanism, but it's an integral part of the Day of the Dead celebration.
It is.
It adds that layer of lightness, playfulness. It reminds us that even in the face of loss, life is to be celebrated.
Well said.
Okay, so we've talked about the art, the music, the humor, all these different elements that make Day of the Dead so special, but family traditions play a role too, right? How do families personalize their celebrations?
Oh, absolutely. Family is at the heart of Day of the Dead, and each family often has its own, unique traditions and customs passed down over generations.
Like what kinds of things do people do?
Anything, really. Could be the food they prepare for the ofrenda or the way they decorate it.
Okay.
Some families have special songs or stories they share. Others, they might visit a particular place on Day of the Dead, a place that's special to them.
It's all about those personal touches, right? Making it their own.
Exactly. And those traditions, they become a way for families to connect with their heritage, keep the memories alive.
It's that thread,
It is.
connecting past, present, future.
And those traditions evolve over time. As families grow and change, new elements get added in. But those core values, remembrance, celebration, those stay.
It's a blend. Tradition and innovation. Like honoring the past, but also embracing the present.
It really is.
We've talked about Day of the Dead becoming more popular worldwide. It's amazing to see this ancient tradition adapting, to modern times.
It's incredible. It's not confined to one place or culture anymore. It really is becoming a global phenomenon.
And as it spreads, it's evolving, taking on new forms. I'm curious, how is Day of the Dead being reinterpreted in these different parts of the world?
Well, in some places, it's being blended with other cultural traditions, kind of a fusion, different ways of honoring and remembering loved ones.
So you might see, like Day of the Dead elements incorporated into, say, Halloween celebrations.
Exactly, or other kinds of festivals. It's fascinating to see how different cultures are finding, resonance with those themes of remembrance, celebration, the themes that are at the heart of Day of the Dead.
It speaks to that universal human experience.
Yeah.
Loss. And wanting to connect with those who've passed.
It really does. And it's exciting to see how these cultural exchanges are shaping the evolution of, this ancient tradition.
It is exciting.
Yeah.
But it also, raises some questions. Like, we need to be mindful of the commercialization of it, the potential for exploiting it, right?
Right. We have to be careful.
Yeah. It's a conversation we need to have.
It's a complex issue. On the one hand, the increased popularity has brought a lot more awareness, right? Introduced it to a wider audience.
Which in a way is a good thing, sharing this beautiful tradition with the world.
It can be, but there's always that risk that it becomes too superficial, that it loses its true meaning.
I've seen it happen too,
Right.
where Day of the Dead imagery is used to sell like random products
Right.
that have nothing to do with it.
And that feels disrespectful, honestly.
It does, because it shouldn't be about, just costumes and parties. It
Exactly.
should be about remembering.
It should be about honoring those we've lost. And I think a big part of navigating this is, education. The more people understand the history, the traditions, the meaning of Day of the Dead, the more likely they are to approach it with respect and sensitivity.
It's about going beyond the surface level then.
Yeah,
Really understanding where it all comes from.
exactly. And it's also about checking ourselves, our intentions. Are we genuinely trying to honor the tradition or just using it for personal gain?
It's a great question.
It is.
It's a question we should all be asking. When engaging with any tradition that's not our own,
I agree.
like we're contributing to this in a meaningful way. We're exploiting it.
Exactly. And when in doubt, just err on the side of caution. Be respectful.
So education, intention, respect, those are the guiding principles, I think, for engaging with Day of the Dead in a way that honors its true spirit.
I agree. And it's an ongoing conversation. As Day of the Dead continues to spread, we need to keep having this discussion, make sure the tradition is preserved, honored for future generations.
As we're wrapping up, I keep thinking about one of the things that really stood out to me in all of this.
What's that?
That idea that Day of the Dead encourages us to, embrace death as a part of life, not fear it.
That's really at the core of it all, isn't it? It's about recognizing that death is not the end, but a transition.
And even celebrating it.
Exactly. Remembering and honoring those who've passed. Not with sadness, but with joy and gratitude for the time we shared.
It's a very different way of thinking about things than what you typically see, In Western cultures where death is often a taboo subject.
Very different. And I think that's one of the reasons why people are drawn to Day of the Dead. It offers a more hopeful way of thinking about it.
It's a reframing of the whole narratives around death.
It is. Instead of fearing it, we can embrace it. It's a natural part of life. And instead of mourning, we can celebrate those lives and keep those memories alive in our hearts.
It's beautiful. Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on.
I agree.
This has been such a rich and insightful conversation.
It has.
Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and perspectives with us.
It was my pleasure. I love talking about Day of the Dead.
And thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Day of the Dead. We hope you've enjoyed it. We'll see you next time.